Welcome to the Pursuit of Learning podcast. I'm your host, Clint Murphy. My goal is for each of us to grow personally, professionally, and financially, one conversation at a time. To do that, we will have conversations with subject matter experts across a variety of modalities. My job as your host will be to dig out those golden nuggets of wisdom that will facilitate our growth. Join me on this pursuit. Division and incivility. I've noticed over the last 18 months as we dealt with COVID and isolation that they've been getting worse. It's why I wanted to talk to Donna Cameron about her book, A Year of Living Kindly, to understand how we can make choices to bring kindness into our lives and to start to help change the world around us. I hope you enjoy our conversation. Donna, welcome to the Pursuit of Learning podcast. How I'd like to start our conversation today is with what's motivating you in life at the moment, and what are 2 to 3 key things you want to ensure we get across to our listeners today?
What's motivating me in life? Well, I'm here to talk about kindness, and that really has been my motivator for some time now. I'm a firm believer that we all need to step beyond our settling for nice and really claim our kindness, which means claim our courage. As far as what I hope we'll talk about today, I want it to be a practical conversation, to talk about what gets in the way of kindness and what the skills of kindness are. What I would love would be for when this conversation is over and people listen to it for their next encounters, them to feel more confident that they can express kindness. So they can go out and go to Starbucks or get on the highway and see more kindness around them and contribute to that.
I love it. And that is my intention for us today as well. So I think we'll do a great job together providing the listeners with tools, tips, techniques, and the benefits so that they understand why kindness is so important. And we'll do a lot of that through diving through your book, A Year of Living Kindly, which brings me to a question about your book, Donna. When you wrote A Year of Living Kindly, what was your motivation and who would you say was your target demographic for reading it?
Well, first I'll say that I did not start out with an intention of writing a book, Clint. I've always, or for at least 20 or 30 years, just been really interested in kindness and noticed how drawn I am to genuinely kind people. And so I wanted to be one. I wanted to be kinder. And it's not that I was an unkind person, but I think I settled for nice. I was raised by a mother who continually said, be nice, but she never ever said, be kind. And I started to notice that there's a difference. So back in 2015, I decided I really wanted to commit to kindness and not let it fall by the wayside when my business got really busy or I was stressed by other things. So I decided to blog about it and invite several friends to follow the blog. And what I wanted to do was not just be kinder and be more aware of kindness around me, but I wanted to learn about kindness. And I had noticed there were a lot of scientific studies about the benefits of kindness. It really had stopped being something that people saw as sort of woo-woo and soft, and scientists, at universities and research centers were measuring the difference kindness made to our health, to business success, to social anxiety, to relationships. So in addition to sharing with the people who were following my blog what I was observing and experiencing about kindness, I wanted to share what I was learning about kindness too. So I assumed this was going to be a 1-year blog where I would learn a lot and hopefully become kinder. I saw really early on that kindness isn't something you adopt for a year and then move on to learning salsa dancing or, tennis or something. I really wanted to make a commitment for life. So I'm still blogging. It's now year 7, I guess. And it was actually the people who were following my blog who encouraged me to turn it into a book. And I had written a book with a co-author a few years earlier, so I knew what that might entail. And I thought, yeah, let's do this. My one hesitation, though, about writing a book was I didn't want to put myself forward as the expert, the kindness expert. I did not want to claim to be a paragon of kindness because I'm not. But I realized in talking to some agents and editors and other authors that I could approach this as, well, you ask who my demographic was. Really, it was sort of me. I wrote the book I would have wanted as a companion on my year of living kindly. So it wasn't so much, a white middle-aged woman, but it was anybody who is concerned about the lack of kindness in our world and the epidemic of incivility we were seeing, no matter what age or what gender or anything, just people who want to see how to bring more kindness into their lives and want to have a toolbox, or maybe a more high-tech analogy would be have some apps they could download to use when they want to express kindness or counter unkindness.
There is so much in there that we're going to unpack. One of the things that it raises for me is you mentioned demographics, age. And so if I look at the listeners of The Pursuit of Learning, statistically, on average, between the ages 25 to 45, plus or minus outside the averages, generally wanting to grow personally, professionally, and financially. And they may ask themselves, Donna, how does kindness help me in each of those areas? And you cover a lot of that in the book, which we'll dive through. What are 2 or 3 things you want to say to them right now to keep them engaged as we take them through the episode and show them how kindness will have an impact on their lives?
I think the first thing I would say is kindness is not weak. I think that's probably the biggest misconception about kindness, that it's weak, it's kind people are easily manipulated, it's not substantial, where I think nothing could be further from the truth. Kindness takes a lot of courage. And if we claim that courage and are willing to exercise that kindness, it really is life-changing. It sounds like we're going to get into some of the health benefits and the business benefits and all of those things. But I was on a plane once and talking to my seatmate, and she asked me what I did, and I was mentioning that I was writing a book about kindness. And I swear, I thought she was going to pat me on the head. She just said, "Oh, well, that's so sweet." And I wanted to say it's not sweet. It's something that a lot of people haven't learned how to do yet. And once they do, it's life-changing. It really does change our relationships at work, our relationships with our family, our relationships with our significant other, or people we hope will become our significant other. Kindness is really a life-changing skill to have.
And Donna, when you first published the book, I don't know if you could have foreseen when you were writing it where we are today with political divisiveness, social media creating even more, it may appear to me, of an us versus them on almost every topic we can conceive of. And the mainstream news not being too far off in creating that division between people. How can we use the message of kindness to bring some of that back so there's a little bit more of centrality, neutralism, respect of each other's opinions? How do you see kindness playing a part in that, Donna?
Well, you're absolutely right, Clint. When I started this, it was early 2015, and the world was really very different then. I know you're in Canada, but I'm here in the United States, and it was before the campaign for our 2016 presidential election. People were generally pretty civil. And all that changed later that year when candidates started just slinging mud like we've never seen before, and things like truth became optional. And we saw so much on social media where people were attacking one another. And one of the things I learned early on is that incivility is contagious, just like a cold or the flu, or sadly like the coronavirus. It passes from one person to the next very easily. If I experience incivility, if somebody treats me rudely, even if I just witness someone treating another person rudely, I am more inclined to behave that way in my next encounters. So I think that's sort of how we got to where we are. We're in the midst of an epidemic of incivility. But science at the same time has shown that kindness is equally contagious. And just the same way, if someone treats us kindly, if we extend a kindness, if we only witness a kindness, it makes us more kind in our future encounters. So one of the things I've tried to be really aware of is every encounter I go into, I've got a choice of which contagion I want to spread. And that, makes me come down on the side of kindness. I think especially now after this year and a half where we've all been going through unprecedented stress. We need to lean on the side of kindness even more than we might be inclined to, and give people the benefit of the doubt. When we see somebody having a meltdown, or we see somebody behaving in a way that we're not okay with, we need to stand up for justice and tolerance and not let people bully others. But we also need to recognize that there are times when people are just going to be having a bad day and be stressed, and maybe they'll cut us off on the highway, or they'll say something rude in the Starbucks line. If we can stop that, if we can be the one to absorb that unkindness and not immediately pass it on to the next person, then we're going to be at the forefront of turning that epidemic around.
Beautiful words. I love that. Let's dive in, Donna, to the book. One of the things you mentioned earlier was that your mother raised you to be nice, not kind. And early in the book, you talk about the difference between being nice and being kind. Can you share for our listeners what you mean by the difference between those two things?
Yeah, and I want to acknowledge that for some people, the difference may be merely semantic. They may see nice and kind as the same thing, and that's fine. I really do see a difference. To me, nice is doing the expected thing, doing the polite thing, being courteous, but not really going much beyond that. It doesn't ask me to take any risk. Nice is safe and benign. Where kind, if I'm being nice, I can do all the right things, but still make judgments about people and still be impatient. But if I'm going to be kind, I really can't. I need to suspend my judgment. I need to be patient with someone. I need to offer the benefit of the doubt. And the other big difference is I think kindness asks us to take some risk. We don't necessarily know what the response to our kind gesture is going to be. Somebody might misunderstand our intent, or maybe we'll do it clumsily. We're not all Fred Astaire in every action we take. Maybe we're afraid that we'll call some unwanted attention to ourselves. So there's a lot of risk involved in being kind. And I don't see that there's a lot of risk involved in being nice.
And Donna, early when I read it, and I noticed I had this question twice when I was taking my notes, because I think once later in the book you actually talked about this, but when I first read the difference between being kind and being nice, what really jumped out at me was the concept of a scarcity mindset versus an abundant mindset. Can you take our listeners how that may interplay between nice versus kind? And if they're unaware of what scarcity versus abundance is, maybe bring them up to speed on those mindsets.
Yeah, and I'm really glad you brought that up, because I think that is something that a lot of us struggle with. We fear that if somebody else gets something, then there's going to be less for us. If they get a promotion, or they get recognition, or something goes their way, instead, it's natural to sometimes feel that little twinge of envy or something, that somebody got something that we would want. But we need to recognize that in most situations, somebody else getting something doesn't mean there's less for us. In fact, often the more we recognize abundance, then the more there is for everybody. It's not what Jennifer James, an anthropologist, calls a limited pie. It's unlimited. There really, in most things, is enough for everybody. And if we can appreciate their successes, there's a lot more chance that not only will we have successes, but people will appreciate ours.
And Donna, you brought up a pie right there, and that's always the example I like to use when explaining scarcity versus abundance. And I look at it, imagine, if you will, you have a certain number of owners of a business and someone wants to join and they say, well, we can't give you a piece of our pie because then we'll have less pie, versus thinking, if we add you into the mix, we'll simply create a bigger pie and we'll all actually enjoy more pie than not having you with us. So that's the way I tend to always like to think of scarcity versus abundance, is there's always more than enough for each and every single one of us. We don't have to begrudge someone else their pie. We should want them to have as much pie as possible, and we'll grow beside them.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's the way it is in society and the economy and so many things. If we help one another to meet their goals, to get their pie, then we all benefit.
And so how does that interplay between being nice and being kind?
Well, probably being nice would be hopefully recognizing that we can come down on the side of abundance, but not necessarily doing anything to help. Where kindness would be stepping in and helping that person meet that goal, or get that next step achieved, and not doing it solely for the reason that, well, if I do this, then I'll get something. Doing it because it feels good to help people.
Donna, early in the book, you mention Dr. Dale Turner. And you say that, I see you smiling as we say that, and you said he would hand out little green cards, and that you've personally kept some of them for years. What did they say, and what does it mean to you?
Okay. If you were to ask me to sum up kindness in 2 words, those words would be extend yourself. And that's what Dale's cards say. Dale was just a lovely man, motivational speaker. He was a theologian, an author. Here in the Seattle community, he was a columnist for the Seattle Times. And he was just one of the kindest people I've ever met in my life. He was one of those people that when you're around him, you just feel good. He's just glows with that positive energy and kindness. And as you said, he used to hand out these little cards that just say, extend yourself on them. And the first time I got one was probably close to 30 years ago now, and it's still in my wallet. And I have another one pinned on a bookcase next to my desk. And it just reminds me that is what kindness is about. It's going the extra mile. It's taking the time, the energy, the thought to help, to step in, to be an activist for not just your life, but for life in general and for the world as you want it to be. So I actually had 1,000 of those cards printed up myself because I wanted to keep Dale's lovely tradition going. He died early in the century, and so now when I speak at groups, I hand out these cards and explain where the idea came from.
I love that, Donna. So one of the things you talk about is the gap between kind. So we've talked about nice and kind, and we haven't really differentiated between kind and unkind. And you talk about that as a chasm of ambivalence and detachment, which seems to be the opposite of what you were just saying, extending yourself, going the extra mile, being an activist for important things. And so that chasm of ambivalence and detachment, can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, I think it's not enough to not be unkind. We need to really come down on the side of kindness. So, there's a story that I share in my book that illustrates this pretty well, if I may. I was at an airport in Detroit flying home after a business meeting, and there was a delay, as often is the case, and it was a long delay, and everybody was in the gate area was getting really impatient, and they were treating the gate clerk as just really rudely. And she was announcing what she learned, but she didn't know much. And she assured us she would keep us informed as she knew things. But people were really, really mad. And I saw them go up to her and threaten and call her names and just speak so rudely to her. And I just marveled at how professionally and graciously she took this sort of abuse. I don't think I could have done it. And I think that probably attests to the good training they get. But I sat there, and there was a point where there was nobody at the desk, and I just felt compelled to go up and tell her how much I appreciated her professionalism and how gracefully she was handling this. And so I did, and I just said that, and I saw this look of relief on her face that I hadn't been another of the people berating her and calling her names. And I went back and continued reading my book. A few minutes later, I noticed that she got a phone call and started typing on her computer. And then she looked up at me and crooked her finger and called me up to the desk. And she said, "Is Seattle your final destination?" And I said, "Yes." And she said, "Well, I've just learned that they're canceling the flight and I'm going to have to rebook everyone. So I've got you a ticket on an American flight that's leaving in 20 minutes. And she printed out the ticket and handed it to me and sent me toward the gate. And as I was walking away, she announced to everyone that the flight had been delayed and everybody would have to rebook. And there was just this mass of people converging on her. And I realized, as I was, overjoyed by my luck, that if I had done nothing, if I had been indifferent and just sat there and said, well, too bad those people are treating her so rudely, but nothing I can do about it. But I had, with no sense of getting anything out of it, taken that extra step, extended myself to go up and say, "I'm really sorry you're having to deal with this, and I want you to know I appreciate how you're handling it." That kindness, rather than unkindness or simply doing nothing, made a huge difference. I think I smiled all the way back to Seattle, but that for me was just such an eye-opener that it's not enough not to be unkind. We need to be kind.
And so some key things there, Donna, when you had a choice. You could have simply sat and watched and felt bad for this poor woman, or, which would have been indifference, or as you say, not being unkind. You weren't going and saying anything negative to her. Or you could extend yourself and go up and talk to her kindly as you did, with a key being there was no purpose for you other than to take away some of her pain and let her know that you saw what she was dealing with. So you didn't go knowing that this flight would be canceled. You went simply with no return expectation other than, I want this person to feel better based on what I'm seeing. And the end result was very positive. So as we talk later, we will see benefits from our kindness. And at the same time, we can't do our kind acts expecting the benefits. They will show up though. With indifference, how do we overcome it? Right? So it would have been so easy for you to just sit there. What are some things we can do so we don't be that person who's just sitting there?
I think they're all really simple, but they're not necessarily easy. Pay attention. We're all so connected to our devices. And maybe there are times when it's not a bad idea to disconnect or to look up from the screen occasionally and notice what's going on around us. And to say to ourselves, is there something I can do here to improve this situation? we all seem to, there's inertia we have to overcome. None of these things are hard, but it takes being willing to put ourselves out there, to overcome fear, the fear of doing it wrong or of being judged or any of those things. Clint, it takes practice. And sometimes I think just with so many things in life, we just need to do it a few times and then realize how good it feels and what a difference it makes. And then we want to, I'm certainly not a paragon of kindness, and I'm never going to be. There are still times when I'm oblivious or grumpy or, I'm just, too much in a hurry. But I try a lot more than I used to be aware of where my kindness might be needed, to look and see if somebody looks like they're really having a bad day, or to say something when somebody else has said something rude, to try to counter that with something nice. It just, I'm thinking back to an old TV commercial. I don't even know what it was for, but try it. You'll like it. It really does make a difference. And not just to the person we're being kind to or extending ourselves to, but to how you feel inside about yourself and your own confidence even.
So the more you do it, the easier it will become. And you used one of our favorite lines for almost anything on the pursuit of learning. It's simple, but it isn't easy, right? Almost everything in life is simple. It just isn't easy. We know what we need to do, but knowing and doing are not the same thing. Let's maybe turn our attention to some of the benefits that people will receive from being kind. So if we can start with the personal benefits, what are some of the mental and physical benefits that your research showed you people can benefit from when they're being kind, Donna?
Yeah, this was really an eye-opener for me too, because, I would say kindness is what people used to call a soft skill, which means it's not really measurable, but now people are able to measure. And for example, on the health front, when we experience kindness, and again, it's receiving it, witnessing it, extending it, our body produces the hormone oxytocin. And that lowers our blood pressure. It reduces inflammation. It fights heart disease and slows aging. There are studies showing that kindness reduces chronic pain. It reduces depression, and it increases our happiness. So those are all things that I think anybody would probably take a vitamin for, or, maybe talk to their doctor for a prescription for it. And the prescription really is kindness. There are studies showing that kind people sleep better, they're more creative, they have greater life satisfaction. There's one that I saw, I think I saw it last fall, a study showing that kind people are more attractive to potential mates. So, if you're out there in the dating world, kindness is a really good strategy for you. Another one that I thought was a wonderful study, this came out of British Columbia 4 or 5 years ago, I guess, and that's that kindness alleviates social anxiety. So people who are painfully shy, even debilitatingly shy, the study showed that if they can focus on kindness, look for a way to express kindness or look for kindness in the situation that has them so stressed, it alleviates that anxiety and helps them experience that situation with much more pleasure.
And was that study talking about whether they seek to extend kindness to others or just witness it? What type of kindness was it speaking to?
It was, what they measured was people extending kindness to others, and they were not huge kindnesses. It was things like, doing your roommate's dirty dishes or allowing cars to merge on the highway, things that we have a choice of doing or not doing. But taking that extra step of extending a kindness helped people be more comfortable in social situations.
And that's on the personal side, Donna. When we then turn to a corporation as an example, whether it's turnover, engagement, profitability, kindness can have a positive impact. Can you share with our listeners how kindness can translate to the bottom line, which is very important for some listeners who, may only think, well, how does this affect my bottom line? It does. And can you share how?
Yeah, and this was another one that was a real big aha for me. I was in business for more than 30 years and had a company and know just how tight margins are between success and failure. The research shows that employees of companies with kind culture perform at 20% higher levels. They're more productive. They offer better customer service. They're healthier. They have fewer absences. There's far less turnover. And I think that one was the one that just blew me away. It said employees of companies with kind culture are 87% less likely to lose their jobs or to leave their jobs. And knowing what it costs to replace an employee, this is huge. You lose money, you lose time, you lose intellectual capacity. There's so much that's lost. Also in kind businesses, employees are more engaged and more committed, and there's an atmosphere where learning and collaboration and even innovation flourish. And then on the company side, the companies are more profitable. I think the figure was 16% more profitable in companies with kind cultures. So more profitable, more productive, don't lose employees. Those things really can mean the difference between success and failure for a company. So I started to think of kindness as a business's competitive advantage.
Competitive advantage. Love that concept. Donna, how though do we take this concept of kindness and bring it into the workplace and create a kind work environment? What does that look like relative to your everyday work environment?
That's a really good question. And I think one of the places to start is just having an honest conversation in the office. And, there are small offices where you can just get everybody around a table and have that conversation. And then there are big corporations where that's not possible. But even in those corporations, there are divisions, there are offices, there are, departments. Everybody can have that conversation. One place to start is to just share some of the research and talk about, we could be better, or maybe just start with, how are we doing? Do we have a kind culture? I think that you can look at everything a company does, from whether it's interviewing to, onboarding a new employee, to how you deal with employee correction, or even when you get to termination, how you do that. You can do all of those things kindly, or you can do all of those things without kindness. If we're comfortable enough to have that honest discussion and say, who are we really? Are we promoting kindness in this space? And how can we do better? And I don't think at all, while I do believe that kindness is really modeled from the top, I don't think it has to always be a top-down behavior. I've gone in offices where the person at the front desk, the receptionist, sets the tone for that business. You get the sense from that person that, gee, this must be a great place to work. They're welcoming, they're generous, they're kind. Or, wow, that person is cold and indifferent, and that's probably what the rest of this office is. So no matter what level somebody is at in a business or in a company, they can exercise kindness. And for the most part, I think it will be perceived as it should be. I look back, Clint, I'm a bit older than you. And when I got into the workforce in the in the 80s, I think it was probably about the mid 80s, there were all these books at that time called Winning Through Intimidation and Nice Guys Finish Last. And, I can't remember all of them, but they were all about being ruthless and cutthroat. And that really was for a short time how people acted. The idea of kindness at that time would never have been appreciated or encouraged. But a lot of those companies are gone, and a lot of those CEOs who were practicing those cutthroat techniques didn't last very long. And now there are all sorts of books. If you just go online and Google it, there are so many books about kindness in the workplace that really quantify the difference it can make and offer suggestions on how to bring more kindness into your workplace.
It sounds, Donna, like the first version is a very Gordon Gekko-like approach for those of us in my generation and earlier who may have seen Wall Street, or whereas the second version is a bit more of a servant leader type model, which seems to tie quite well into a kind corporate culture. And it really jumped out at me as you were talking about it, and not necessarily as I was reading, but something that I believe in as a leader is serving the people that are on your team. So that makes sense as a way to approach that. Donna, I'm going to take a pivot with you. A friend of yours came over to your house and she saw a quote on your wall and she teared up. And it's one of my favorite quotes and one of the things that I've been working very hard in my life to integrate. And that quote was, "Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom." Can you take our listeners through who wrote that quote and how important kindness was in his life, especially given what he lived through relative to what most of us live through on a daily basis?
Yeah, the quote is from Viktor Frankl, who wrote Man's Search for Meaning. And if some of your listeners aren't aware of him or that book, it's a wonderful little book, a very easy read. He was a victim of the Holocaust in a German concentration camp where every day could conceivably be the last. They were, of course, under the most horrendous conditions. And he observed, I'm not sure if he was a psychologist before he was in the concentration camp or if he became one later, but he observed that the people who did better were the people who did not view themselves so much as victims, but who tried to make the best of the situation. And often people who, would share their bread with someone else or be an encourager. So, one of the things that I get out of that quote is that one of the biggest skills of kindness is learning to pause. In that space between, I don't have it in front of me, between, what is the phrase again? In the space between...
I always just refer to it as the space between stimulus and response. And I always like to, if you look at your hands and you have the knuckles intertwined, there's no space, but as you pull your hand apart, you're just trying to grow that space.
Yeah. And I think most of us are just sort of trained just through living to respond immediately. If somebody says something rude to us, we throw it right back. Or if we're offended, we don't stop and think about it. Where if we can make that pause between stimulus and response, we can decide who we want to be. So our behavior isn't dependent on what somebody did to us or what we perceive somebody did to us. It's on who we want to be. And that's one of the biggest learnings in kindness. And it's one of those things that's really simple, but it isn't easy. But if we can learn to pause, to stop and say, here's another piece of it, is to engage our curiosity. So to stop and say, gee, I wonder why she said that. Or I wonder if maybe she didn't intend that to sound the way it came out. Or is there something else going on that I might not be aware of? Is that person just stressed to the max, and this is a response that 5 minutes from now they're going to regret? And then asking that question of, how can I respond in a way that promotes the world as I want it to be, rather than advances bad behavior? So that's such a powerful, powerful quote. And, in the context of what he was going through, for him to recognize that is just astonishing.
So because the pause is such an important part of life, not only for kindness, but ensuring that we end up living the life we want to live. And what I mean by that, Donna, is often we just respond instinctually in almost everything, right? Subconsciously, we make the decision, we respond. And that will often hold us back personally, professionally, financially, because quite often our thinking is actually flawed. And so one of the questions is, how do we increase the pause? How do we grow, let's call it, our pause muscle?
Well, coming back to, practice, it does take practice. And, I've had women say to me, and I think this is more of a female thing, I don't want to be, biased. I've had women say to me, sometimes I can't pause because if I pause to think about something, some man will jump in and start talking. So, even if you want to pause and think about something, hold up a finger. Just say, just give me a moment. It takes practice, but just remind yourself of that. There are all these things people can do to remind themselves, from putting the elastic band around the wrist to, I think it's the Rotary Club that has 4 questions that they stop and ask before they respond. Is this, and I don't have that right in front of me either, but I can find that.
It was on my list of questions, so I will seek to pull that up, because I wanted to go into the 4 questions that the Rotarians ask.
Yeah, they're wonderful questions. And I'm looking here too. And interestingly, over the last couple of years, I've been speaking to so many Rotary clubs, and it's like preaching to the choir. It's something that they really have ingrained. And at the beginning of every Rotary meeting, they repeat these questions. And so before responding, they have this 4-question test to help members decide whether and how to respond. And the questions are, is it the truth? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill and friendship? And will it be beneficial to all concerned? And so if the answer is no, they keep silent. What wisdom is that? One thing I've noticed, Clint, is I think I talk less now. I really, before I say something, I often think, does this add to the conversation? Is this really important for me to say? And often it's not. I don't need to criticize what somebody said or did. I'm getting a little afield here, but just reminded me of something that I really noticed. We all have people in our lives like this, I suspect, people who spend their time listening for the missed note. My company managed not-for-profit organizations. So we had lots of boards of directors and members and, wonderful, wonderful people and wonderful groups representing fabulous causes. But there were always a couple of members who, when the monthly newsletter came out, they would be the one to call and say, there's a typo on page 4. Or it's the person you go to a restaurant with them and they notice a typo on the menu or a sign that has, something misspelled. I think we can decide whether we want to be people who look for what's wrong or look for what's right. And having said that, I don't ever mean that we overlook injustice or intolerance or anything like that. We have to decide, is this worth it? And for many things it is. And that's where it takes your courage to express that kindness, to stand up to a bully or to stand beside someone who's being treated unfairly. But, do you want to point out that they spelled welcome wrong on their menu or that there's a typo in a letter? Is that important?
Exactly. Understanding what hills are worth dying on versus simply being critical of everything you come across are two very different things. One of the ways that I've been working on to increase my gap, if you will, Donna, it has been, I'd say, a couple things. Cognitive behavioral therapy, some of the training through that, which led me to find Stoicism. And it's actually in reverse order, if you will, because Stoicism's thousands of years old, but the founders of cognitive behavioral therapy actually created it through their learning of Stoicism. So I learned through those. And then also through Buddhism, which brought me into meditation and mindfulness, and just all being ways to do a few things. One, calm down my own mind. And two, learn to ask questions of everything that's coming in. And not just coming in from outside, but coming in from your own mind, because you mentioned in there that often we respond not to what was said, but to our perception of why the person said it. So one of the things that Stoicism will always do is say, you immediately have a thought of why someone said what they said. That's your perception. And so what it will teach you to do is to say, well, is that perception right? And so question the perception, question the thought before you give assent to it, which is a really old way of looking at it when I hear it, but just makes so much sense to not simply accept every thought you have as real, but to question the thought and only accept as reality those thoughts that pass the test, if you will. Lay out 2 to 3 logical alternatives and say, okay, which one's more likely? And then let that thought in. And when I thought of kindness and I thought of the pause, it really made me think, well, if I'm purposefully hearing what someone is saying and I'm putting it through the thought filters, and some of those thought filters are to your point, when someone's behaving with us in a way, Donna, where it doesn't seem right at first, you may ask yourself, well, why? Right? And part of that's the curiosity. What's happening in that person's life that's making them behave this way to me? And so then your response may be to ask that question instead of tacking back, right?
I think that's very true. I think it's just human nature that we perceive something and we create a story around it. And sometimes those stories are just so completely off the mark. And what's happening, we generally put ourselves in the center of those stories because we're human. And what's happening may not have anything to do with us or anything to do with what we're imagining. And you're so right. If we can stop and ask that question to ourselves and then maybe even ask the person to say, here's what I'm feeling right now, or here's what I heard. Is this what you intended? And even to be willing to say something like, I'm really sorry I offended. And even if you don't know how you offended somebody, but being willing to take that on and let that person know that you recognize that they were stressed and they acted in a way that maybe for some reason they saw something in me that I hadn't intended. And so to give them a reason to say, oh, I'm sorry, I spoke incorrectly, or I did something else that's going on in my life. One of the things that we used to say in my company a lot, and we actually had it on the agenda of a lot of board meeting agendas and things, was we assume one another's good intent. And if we can really do that, if we can assume one another's good intent, it changes everything. If we can give that benefit of the doubt and not make the assumption that that person is out to get me or out to insult me. changes everything.
Yeah, if you assume that when we're together, we're all coming at everything we do with good intent in our hearts, then when something's off, it's easier to spot and harder to take it personally, right? It's more likely that it's something bad happening in that other person's life that ideally we can approach from a heart-centered place.
Yeah. And sometimes if we can do that, that gives them a space to stop, to pause, and to realize what's happening with them. And maybe it stops that unpleasant interaction right there. You know, and it depends a lot on how we say it and, you know, how we stand and how we hold ourselves and our voice. These things take practice, and it's something you can even practice just in the privacy of your own bedroom or something. But to say something like, I'm sorry I offended you, or I hope the rest of your day goes well, or it sounds like you're having a bad day. But to say those things without judgment or without sarcasm, you know, it's just as easy to say, well, I'm sorry if I offended you. You know, that's not going to help. But
No, it's just going to set it off.
Yeah, but if you can say it in a way that's genuine, that person might stop. And maybe in that minute, they're not going to say, oh, I really overreacted, didn't I? But maybe 10 minutes later, they'll say, gee, I wish I had reacted differently, and maybe next time I can do better.
You're making me want to pull a book I read last year, Nonviolent Communication, which was absolutely an amazing book on communication and how to handle that. And my recollection is, in that situation, you may respond with, I sense that something I said may have offended you. And you leave an opening for that person, and then you just pause and stay silent and leave an opening for that person to respond back with what's going on in their life. Right. And it gives you such great tools and tricks on, not tricks, sorry. I mean the word tools and tricks as in these are beneficial ways of doing it. But when you use the word tricks, people think you're, doing it to trick someone. It adds to your tool belt and how to communicate in a way that brings everyone in the conversation together and disarms the negative energy.
That sounds like a book I need. What, Nonviolent Communication?
It's Nonviolent Communication by Marshall Rosenberg. And it may be Dr. Marshall Rosenberg, and I believe he's passed on, but it's an absolutely wonderful, wonderful book on communication. Last year, I have a close friend who likes to also read, and I think there was only 2 books that I threw at him that we both found amazing. And one of them, because it really talks about how to live your life. And we both just said, this is one of the best books we've ever read. And the second one was Nonviolent Communication. And the difference was, he said, I love that you gave this to me. But the difference between this and the last one is this one shows me how I'm doing everything wrong. Which, and he's a great human being, and so I don't think he was doing everything wrong, but it definitely teaches you that, wow, assuming that most of what it's saying is right, and given when you read it, you get that feeling, it shows you where there are some holes in your communication game. And definitely with those close around you, Donna, your partner, your children, it's an eye-opening book for sure. And I think it really does talk about, in there, now that I think about it, it does talk about how to use that pause effectively and grow it and share that communication. Sorry, I took us on a big digression there. So if we come back, so we've talked a little bit about kindness to others and extending kindness to other people. And what I really appreciate that you did is you also brought kindness inwards. Because often, Donna, we are easily our own worst critic for a lot of us, right? And so can you share the importance of being kind to ourselves? And you've said it a few times about other people, but the importance of suspending judgment for us.
Exactly. Yeah, I think there are 2 aspects to it. One is learning to be kind to ourselves. And a lot of us put others first. And, there are times when that's absolutely appropriate, but you can't, on a sustained way, extend kindness to others if you don't extend kindness to yourself. You need to know what that feels like for yourself. And that means suspending judgment, as you said. It means learning not to engage in negative self-talk. You know, how so often we say things about ourselves that we would never say about somebody else. Oh, I'm fat, I'm stupid, I'm such a loser. These things we say, they internalize. So we need to be kind to ourselves. And there isn't a one-size-fits-all way of being kind, I don't think. For each of us, we need to really think about, what sort of kindness do I need to give myself? For some people, that might mean saying yes to more things. For somebody else, it might mean saying no, or setting boundaries, or choosing how we will let other people talk to us. It might mean going for walks with the dog. It might mean taking a bubble bath or exercising. You know, it's whatever we need to feel authentic, to feel like we're enriching ourselves. So there are as many ways to be kind to ourselves as there are things to do. But I think it's just being aware of what we're feeling. Am I depleted? Am I losing my energy? Do I need to pull back and take care of myself before I can keep taking care of everybody else? And then the other piece is being able to receive kindness. A lot of people aren't real good at that. There are people who are just wonderful givers, and they can, give to other people all day long, but then you try to give something to them and they won't. They push you back. Maybe they were raised with the notion that, pull yourself up by your own bootstraps, or, be independent. But we need to be willing to receive kindness as well as give it. And that can be, sometimes it's a gift somebody wants to give that you don't want to take, or maybe it's a seat on the bus or compliment. How often do we compliment somebody and they kick it back at us? They say, oh, no, I don't look good today. I've gained 5 pounds, or, this blouse needs ironing, whatever. We deflect people's compliments and it makes them feel bad. So we need to learn to accept the kindness of others, even if it makes us uncomfortable, because it makes them feel good.
I want to dive into both of those separately. So we'll come back to how to receive compliments and how to receive kindness, because I agree with you that for a lot of us, it is hard. And I know it's very hard for me to accept kindness from others. So I love the idea of diving into how to overcome that and how to receive kindness. But if we go back to the first one, there were at least four things that I read in the book that you highlighted as being important when we're being kind to ourselves. And the ones that I wrote down were knowing when to say yes or no, changing our self-talk, which you highlighted a little there, recognizing boundaries, and forgiving. Can we talk about the importance of those four and how utilizing them increases the kindness towards ourselves, Donna?
Yeah, well, let's start with forgiving, because I think that's a hard one for a lot of people. I've had a lot of people tell me that they really struggle with that, whether it was, a parent who did not know how to love, or an ex-spouse or lover who did a really bad job. Carrying that resentment is a burden for us. And that doesn't mean, forgiving doesn't mean you say, okay, I deserve that abuse and it's okay, and you get a pass for it. But it means I'm not going to carry that burden anymore and let it affect my life negatively. So, in a sense, it's saying, okay, this happened and I'm going to let it go degree I can. I'm going to learn from it and then let it go. And, that doesn't mean that you give somebody a pass for bad behavior, but it means you don't let bad behavior destroy your own life or inhibit your own life. And let's see, there was negative self-talk. I think we mentioned that. It's just, what are we saying about ourselves in front of others and to ourselves? That those tapes that we run in our brains about who we are. Why not say positive things, even if we're not sure they're true yet? That's how they become true, when we believe that we're smart and capable and worthy.
Yeah, replace I am not something with I am something, and then do it. Before we go to the next one, Donna, can we go back to forgiving for a second? Because I want to run something by you to see if the way I thought about this one was accurate. I had a meditation with a friend last week, and we were doing a practice called RAIN, and we were talking through each of our scenarios, and we were talking about forgiveness, the practice of forgiveness through meditation. And my partner was talking about a situation with a past partner, and the way we were interpreting forgiveness, what I thought they were looking for was they were not thinking necessarily of forgiveness, but actually of closure. And what jumped out at me as the difference was when I heard you say forgiveness, it aligned with what I was thinking, which was, I'm not going to carry that burden or let it influence me, as in, I'm going to let it go. Which means I don't actually need to talk to that person to forgive them. I can just forgive them myself in my mind. Whereas, because a question that they had was, do I need to talk to that person in order to forgive them? Do I need to share with them how it impacted me, etc.? And to me, that seems more like getting closure. You're trying to close the situation with the person, but you don't need to have a communication with someone to forgive them. What do you think?
I think you're absolutely right. And often the people we need to forgive are long gone. They're out of our lives or they're dead. And I'm actually really glad you brought us back to forgiveness, because I think there's another point too, and that's that we need to forgive ourselves. For all the stupid things that we've done, when we said the wrong thing, or when we hurt somebody's feelings, or when we made a choice that we later regretted. We all do those things. And if we hang on to all those regrets, it's a really heavy burden. So forgiving others is really important, but I think forgiving ourselves might be even more important.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Excellent. Thank you, Donna. And sorry, so we did forgiveness, changing our self-talk, trying to talk more positively. And I'd heard in the past, Donna, I don't remember where it was, if our monkey mind or our inner critic were a real life roommate, we'd have long had them evicted from the house. So that might align with what we were sharing earlier. The other two were knowing when to say yes or no and recognizing boundaries.
Yeah, those two have some overlap with them. A lot of people aren't really good at acknowledging their own needs. If somebody says, can you do this for me? Or I want to do X, so let's go. And we don't want to, there's sometimes when in any relationship we compromise. We do what one person wants to do part of the time and what another person wants to do the other parts of the time. And hopefully there are enough parts where both of them want to do everything. But if there are things that just don't fit, don't feel right, you need to not be on that hamster wheel. So times when you want to say no, I need to stay home, or I need to take care of myself, or you go ahead without me. And I think that also applies to boundaries, to, how we will and won't let people talk to us, how we let people treat us is really a sign of how we value ourselves. There's an old saying that we teach people how to treat us by what we allow and when we're able to say yes and no. I think knowing what our boundaries is a really important skill to have. I have a friend who talks about values and says values are decisions we make in advance. So we know when somebody approaches us with a suggestion, if it's something that is not one of our values or it's outside of what we're comfortable with, we know we're going to say no.
So when we're answering a yes or no, one of the questions to ask ourselves is, does what I'm committing to or not choosing not to commit to align with my values? And how do people know what their values are?
I teach classes in values, so there's a long pause here because, I think it's something that we do as we live our lives. We recognize what feels good and what doesn't feel good in terms of behaviors and what's important to us. So, for some people, values are how we choose to live with one another. Some people define values as things. I value my family, my job, my this, where for others, values are more attitudes, I guess I'd call them. It's being honest, having integrity. It's forgiving is a value. I think we pay attention. One of the best ways to determine our values is to read good books and think about what we learned from that, what the moral was, what if it's fiction, what the characters were choosing to do and not to do, and how would we respond in similar situations.
That's a great one. So through reading fiction, recognizing who are our favorite characters generally and how do they live their life? Because if I'm consistently choosing those characters as my favorites from book to book and they all have commonalities, those are probably things that are important to me.
I think that's a real good indicator. And, if somebody doesn't read a lot, you can do the same with movies or television or something like that. What draws you to a character? What repels you? What do you respect about other people that you encounter?
So what attracts you to people? What repels you from people? What attracts you probably values you admire. What repels you probably values that you don't. And I ask this, Donna, because with so many young people that I work with in various capacities, if I try to work with them on a long-term goal-setting mission and say, hey, the goals that you should be choosing in your life should align with your values, a lot of them don't know what their values are, and they don't know how to find them, which is a really fun, challenging area in not teaching courses on values, to try to educate them on how to come up with their list of values.
And I wonder if it's that they don't know how to articulate their values, but I think most people have values by the time they're young adults and entering into the professional world. They know how they want to behave. They know what they want the world they work and live in to look like. They may not have articulated that as values, but I think most of us, just through the process of living, recognize what's important to us and what we hope the world that we're going to be thriving in is going to look like.
It's a beautiful way to think about it. So I took you on a values side topic. If we come back to kindness as a whole, you would think that everyone would think, being kindness seems like the obvious choice to make. I should be kind. And we don't. So why? What are some of the greatest roadblocks that get in our way? And can we talk about how we might overcome some of them? A couple key ones that you mention in the book are fear and time. And I know there's obviously a lot more. So do you want to take us into some of the greatest roadblocks, Donna?
Yeah, I think fear really is probably the biggest one. And that comes in a lot of different flavors. We're afraid of being judged. There are people who are going to say, if you extend kindness, you're weak. Not many people, and I think those people are probably the weakest among us, but they just don't get the courage that it takes to be kind. But we're afraid of, the unknown. We're afraid of making ourselves vulnerable, and that's what we do when we step into the unknown. we don't know how somebody's going to react, and maybe they'll misunderstand what our intent was, or maybe we'll just not do it really well. So I think fear is a big one, and it's one of those things where, just like so many things, you need to step past it and do it and learn from that. And every time we do it, it gets easier to the point where I'm not going to say kindness ever becomes automatic. Maybe it does for the Dalai Lama and Mother Teresa or something, but it becomes more of our default setting, and it becomes easier. And so we stop caring so much about what some stranger is going to think if we step up and help somebody else, or if we stop to give some money to somebody on the street, if somebody else is going to criticize us because we're just enabling them. So getting past that fear just really takes practice. Now, you mentioned time, and that is a big one. I've had a lot of people come up to me after a talk and say, I'd really like to be kinder, but I just don't have time. I'm so overscheduled and there's so much on my calendar. I just don't have time. And I guess I would challenge, if that's the concern, I would challenge you to look at how you view time and how you view kindness. There's no question that sometimes it does take time to be kind, to stop and help somebody, or to, using the example of giving a couple of dollars to somebody on the corner, to do it in such a way that you don't just press the money into their hands and run on and never make eye contact, but to connect with them and let them know that you have recognized them and see them. Those things take time, but I guess for me, I started looking at kindness as part of my job description. I don't mean my job description for my company so much as my life job description. And so if it takes a little time to stop and, thank somebody, or to engage with someone, or to hold a door, or offer to carry somebody's packages, that's okay. That's my job. And admittedly, there are going to be times when somebody is so pressed for time or on such a tight schedule that they can't stop and help. But most of the time we can. And so if we don't use time as an excuse often, then that gives us so many more opportunities to be kind. I talked earlier about obliviousness. I think we often just don't notice. We're so involved, not just in our devices, but our internal drama and the stories we're running in our head and the worries and things, that we don't pay attention to what's happening around us. I guess it's mindfulness, but it's noticing that the guy behind us has his hands full and we could hold the door. Or I've had so many people come to me and say, I think I'm a pretty kind person in general, except when I'm behind the wheel of my car, and then I'm just terrible. That's when we can look for those opportunities. Instead of speeding up when a car is trying to merge, slowing down so they can, not cutting somebody off, just driving with courtesy. It's amazing how, one person driving with courtesy can sort of start a line of cars that are behaving a little bit better. Yeah, another one is keeping score.
Oh, yes. I recall that really bothered you. So walk us through that one. Oh, the Christmas list. Yes.
Yeah. And there's a story in my book that I tell, but we do it in so many different ways. And I guess I hadn't really paid attention to it until I had that particular example. But, we say it's their turn to have us over for dinner. We had them last. Or I'm not going to call her. It's her turn to call me. Or she didn't acknowledge my birthday, so I'm not going to acknowledge hers. All these things that we do to keep score, when really we don't know what's going on in somebody else's life that made it so, maybe they're really stressed and the last thing they have time to do is wish me a happy birthday. Well, I'm not going to hold that against them. So again, it gets down to giving the benefit of the doubt and not keeping score. I remember being in a you can tell I go to Starbucks a lot because I have a lot of Starbucks stories, but I was in a Starbucks line and two young women were talking about, it was around Christmas, and I always give him much nicer presents than he gives me. And they were just sort of keeping score on how they exchange gifts with their loved ones. Some people are good at that stuff. Some people aren't. Some people have more money than others. Some people are better shoppers. But if we're going to start measuring things by, well, he gave me bubble bath and I gave him a watch, the only thing we're doing is sabotaging ourselves and our own happiness.
Yeah, it never works out well in a relationship of any kind if you're keeping track of who won or who lost, or in general, just keeping score. You'll both lose. And Donna, I never hold Starbucks against anyone. I go on average at least twice a day, almost every day. So I'm a reasonably big fan of the place. I realized I meant to come back to how we receive kindness and forgot to do so. Do you want to rewind and say how we can improve on receiving kindness? Because that seemed to be something we said was very important to do, but many of us don't have that muscle.
Yeah, and I think it's really simple. It's just thinking more about the other person than about ourselves. So, if instead of deflecting that compliment or being uncomfortable that somebody gave us something that we don't think we deserve, or being insulted because they think we need their seat on the bus more than they do, thinking about, if I accept this, they'll feel good. It's as simple as that. I can help this person feel better by simply accepting this compliment and thanking them graciously for it, or accepting that seat on the bus, or, thanking them for the gift that they're offering me. It's that simple.
So simply thanking them. Don't qualify it. Don't put a platitude on it. Just thank them. Whew, that's one that and I don't know why, Donna. It's maybe there's a sense of, subconsciously I'm not enough or I'm not good enough. And so when I get a compliment or I receive a kindness, it's hard to accept. And so that's something I have to learn to overcome, because the person that's doing it deserves to feel right for offering that kindness. And so it's just learning to accept it, thank them, and overcome those feelings of inadequacy myself later on.
Well, view it as you're giving them a gift in return by accepting that compliment graciously, or accepting that gift graciously.
Thank you. I'm writing that one down. You're giving them a gift in return. And Donna, if I come back to, and sorry, I'm dancing us in circles on these ones, when you were talking about the fears that we have around kindness, whether it's a fear of being rejected, or I'm being vulnerable, or someone's going to call me weak, how do you overcome those fears?
Well, sometimes it's just doing it. And then sometimes it's, thinking about, well, if I do this, what's the worst thing that's going to happen? But not focusing on that question. Instead, saying, what's the best thing that might happen here? I mean, you often, when you're at a choice point and you're talking about it with somebody, they'll say, well, what's the worst that can happen if you do that? And I think an even better question is, what's the best that can happen if you do that? If you don't extend a kindness, nothing changes. But if you do extend a kindness, even if it makes you uncomfortable and squirmy, that might be just what that person needs at that time. And then they'll pass a kindness on to somebody else. There are all these stories out there, and sure, many of them are true, of people who were, just at the extreme of stress, and, they were contemplating suicide, or they were just so stressed they didn't know where to turn. And somebody's kindness helped them through that. So, thinking about maybe this kindness that I want to extend will really make a difference in this person's life. And, even if it seems like it's really puny, it's not, because it's going to change something. And then maybe they'll extend a kindness. And by the time your kindness has rippled out, it might have, changed something enormous. We have to trust that our kindnesses really are rippling out into the world.
Yeah, Donna, what you're making me think of there, often I try to draw parallels to other worlds because then it can really cement concepts for me and maybe for the listeners. And one of the things I talk about in finances is asymmetrical risk or opportunity. And generally, when I'm thinking of an asymmetrical risk, what I want is for my level of investment, my upside is much higher than my downside. And so when I'm thinking of extending kindness or investing kindness, if you will, when I answer those two questions, what's the worst that can happen? Someone laughs at me. Someone rejects my kindness. What's the worst? It's pretty low. There's not much downside when you really get into it. But then if I think, what's the best that can happen? I save someone's life. They extend kindness, it saves someone's life. You know, when you look at that upside return against the potential downside, it's such an asymmetrical bet that you want to be extending kindness as much as you can.
Beautiful example. That's so true. Yeah, I like that. Asymmetrical. I like that. Yeah, and it's what we want to model. I think most of us look at the people around us, the people in leadership positions, and we see good models and we see horrendous models. And, what do we want to be? Do we have the courage to model the world as we hope we are manifesting it?
It brings up a huge one, Donna, because I have two young boys, 13 and 10. And I think as we walk up the stairs to our bedrooms, I believe we've got to hang it. It's just sitting on the stairs. No, I think we actually did hang it. It says, be a nice human. I'm going to strike out nice and kind and Sharpie. But how do my wife and I teach our boys to be kind?
You model it. If they see you being kind to people, regardless of who they are, not just people who are important and can help you advance or something, but they see you being kind to the cashier at the grocery store or the mechanic at the tire store or the homeless person on the corner, that's what they're going to start behaving like. But if parents say, you always have to be kind, just be kind, but then they hear their parents in the car calling the driver in the car next to them a moron, or the sports stadium yelling and calling people names and treating people unkindly, that's what they're going to learn. You can tell kids lots of things, but what they really will start, their behavior will be what they see, and what they see their parents especially, but other people in their life, their teachers and the other important adults in their lives. So there's nothing more important than modeling what we want our kids to be.
It's another one that, like we talked about earlier, simple versus easy, right? There's so many things in life that we think we can just tell our children, oh, do this or do that, and it's do as I say, not as I do. At the end of the day, our children are going to do as we do. And so everything comes down to just, be the parent that you want them to become, right? So if you want them to be kind, be kind.
Yeah. And also having conversations about kindness, whether it's around the dinner table or if you're somewhere where you witness somebody treating somebody unkindly, talk about that. Say, why do you suppose that person acted that way? And how would you have acted if you were in that situation? Or maybe around the dinner table, asking your kids, did you do something kind today? Or did you see a kindness today? Just helping them become aware of kindness. I think kids are some of the best ambassadors for kindness we have. They really want to see it. And I think they find it really disturbing to see unkindness. And after a while, if unkindness becomes commonplace, then they'll start adopting it. But I have had an opportunity to talk to a few schools, elementary schools and high schools. And it's something kids are really aware of. And I think we need to learn from them as well as try to model the best behaviors for them.
I love that idea that you brought up around the dinner table, just saying, what did you do kind today? I recall it was maybe early in the pandemic a year ago, and we were doing that. We were saying, hey, what was your act of kindness today? And I remember doing it for a few weeks or a month, and every day, when you first started, they'd have trouble thinking of what they did that was kind. And like everything, it just compounded. The more they did it, they'd, sit down and they'd be like, oh, here's the kind things I did today. And they'd have a list. Like, I held the door for every kid in class, or I helped my teacher with this. And the list just kept growing. So it was almost pulling teeth to get an act of kindness early on. And in the end, they were just so kind. And it got so good that we're like, okay, they've got this. And we stopped that exercise of asking. And now that I think about it, I wonder, why would I have stopped? That's something they, increase that kindness muscle for life. So that's something we definitely have to bring back into the family conversation, Donna.
Yeah, that's a great conversation. And I hope when you have that, you and your wife are also sharing your own kindnesses.
Yes, of course. We had to go first to establish it. Okay. Yeah, I'm writing that one down. I love that. And so we were talking about asymmetrical risk as a financial tie-in to kindness. And there was another area where in your book you talked about finance, and that was with respect to generosity. And so when most people think about generosity, they tend to only think about the financial aspects of it. But you had a concept, you talk about the 3 T's. And can you share those with us and how those relate to generosity? And if you can't recall them off the top of your head, I may have written down what page they're on. And
well, if I remember correctly, it's treasure, time, and talent. Yes. Okay. That's something that is a concept in the nonprofit world where I worked for so many years that we used a lot. That's what volunteers bring to the organizations that they join or they donate some time to. And for some, it's treasure, it's money. They can help, they pay dues or they make generous donations. And that's certainly an important part of any nonprofit's bottom line and success. But it's also the time that people are able to give, to serve on a committee or to be a board member or to go out and help with whatever the organization's mission is. And I'm using it in regard to nonprofit organizations, but, it translates everywhere, the time you give to your community or your family or your neighborhood. And then talent, some of us are skilled in lots of different areas, whether it's helping an organization, if you're a skilled accountant, helping by being the treasurer or helping them, put a budget together, or maybe your talent is baking and you can do cupcakes for a bake sale or something, thinking about what I can give. And it isn't always money. I think there are people for whom giving money is not always an option. They say that the people with the least amount of money, percentage-wise, probably donate the most. But, there are times when there's nothing to spare, but that doesn't mean you can't be generous. And there are so many ways we can be generous that don't involve money. Emptying the dishwasher in your office, even if you didn't have dirty dishes, or offering to help somebody with a project where you've got some skill. There are so many creative ways we can be generous that don't require writing a check or spending money we don't have.
And so offering the skills and talents you have and your time when you don't have the financial resources to contribute money. It's an excellent way to look at it. And you can even do that in your own home, right? Is to offer your time and your skills to your partner and to your children instead of just taking off and watching Netflix on your own, actually using your time to model the right behaviors to them. Donna, we've already somewhat covered this earlier when we were talking about the importance of modeling our behavior to our children. And as an example, behaving the same way to the janitor as we do to the CEO. You talk about the importance of being kind versus situationally kind. Can you explain what situationally kind is and why that's not what we're going after when we're trying to encourage kindness overall?
We've probably all experienced this to some extent. The people who just fall all over themselves to be kind to people who can help them advance in some way, where they treat other people as if they're disposable. I saw this in my company a lot when people would see me as the person, the decision maker who, maybe decided where a conference would be held, what hotel or what speaker we would hire or something like that. So when they talk to me, they might be just so kind and deferential and just falling all over themselves to be flattering, I guess, where maybe to get to me, they were rude to our receptionist or couldn't care less about the other people in our office who they talked to on the way. That's opportunism more than it is kindness. That's doing something for what you're going to get out of it rather than doing something for who you're going to be by it. And if you don't think people notice that, we all talk, whether it's in our office or other people who are in the profession. We know who the people are who are genuinely kind and the people who are just going to say what they think they need to say to make this sale or get this bit of business or something. And the people who are genuinely kind are the ones I want to do business with.
In all areas of your life, Donna, there's no greater way for me to ensure that I'm not going to be on your side than being offensive to someone who's on my team, right? If you speak ill to my accounts payable team or to one of the development accountants on my team, there's no way I'm going to want to be kind to you, right? If you yell at the receptionist on your way in, it's pretty much going to ensure that you're going out pretty quickly, right? These are the people we work with. These are the people we spend our time with. If you can't be kind to them, then I can't trust you being kind to me.
Exactly. And also you show support for those people by not letting people disrespect them or treat them badly. So your receptionist or your accounts payable person knows that you've got their back if you are not going to let people treat them that way or reward people for treating them that way.
And that goes back to what you said earlier. We teach people how they can treat us by what we're willing to accept. So if we accept poor behavior to people on our team, we're telling them it's okay to behave that way. And to your point earlier, it's contagious. So if they see us accepting that bad behavior in others, they think they can behave that way. And if we then question them, they say, well, it was okay when you let Ted treat me that way. Why can't I treat Tim that way? And so we have to model not only what we expect of them, but what we're willing to accept from people outside the organization. I hadn't even put that two and two together. That makes perfect sense, Donna. Sorry, I'm cognizant of time, and there's a fair amount that I still had on my list, but I want to make sure I capture some of the key ones, because as great as the book was, we started to get to the tail end, and that's where you had some real heavy hitters. For example, you had your own kindness manifesto. Do you want to share with the listeners what your kind of kindness manifesto is, Donna?
Sure, I'll be glad to. And I give this with the encouragement that I hope after reading the book, people will create their own, and maybe some of my own manifesto will be yours. But everybody's different, and what resonates for you may not be what resonated for me. Do you want me to just read the manifesto? Okay. All right. I've found it helpful to create a kindness manifesto to guide me and remind me of my most important purpose. Feel free to adopt it as your own, or better yet, adapt it to express your own kindness declaration. First, pay attention. Remember that your intention will direct your attention. Choose to see goodness and kindness. Withhold judgment. We can never know what challenges others are facing. The benefit of the doubt is one of the greatest gifts you can give. Pause. You don't need to respond instantly. Think about the kind response, which is often silence. Receive graciously. Kindness means receiving as well as giving. Understand the joys others feel in giving and help them experience that joy. Take care of you. Kindness begins with self. If we cannot be kind to ourselves, we have little to offer others. Accept your shortcomings, forgive your blunders, hold to your boundaries, and indulge in simple pleasures. Be grateful. Kindness grows from a sense of abundance and appreciation. There's always something to be grateful for. Every kindness matters, even the smallest. We never know how far our smile or kind word will ripple, so use every opportunity to create a ripple. Choose peace. Life is not always easy and not always fair. Regardless, you can choose peace. If kindness isn't evident, look harder. If you still can't see it, make it yourself. And the last one, always choose kindness. You will never regret it.
It was I enjoy your kindness manifesto. It's heartwarming, especially hearing you read it, Donna. Is there anything in our conversation that was missing that you want to make sure our listeners get as they start to think about kindness, how good it can be for them, how much courage it takes to extend? Is there anything else you want to add to the listeners, Donna?
I guess the thing that jumped into my mind is start where you are. You know, there's nobody who's going to go from being oblivious and relatively, indifferent to being Mother Teresa overnight or the Dalai Lama overnight. Start where you are, and if you would like to bring more kindness into your life, think of it as something you do incrementally. Maybe the first couple of weeks you think, what would it look like if I were 5% kinder? And then do some of those things. Go to greet your coworkers at the office, or allow cars to merge, or hold a door. Most kindnesses are really small things, but that doesn't mean they don't make a big difference. And forgive yourself when you lapse. Nobody's going to ever be perfect at kindness. So do the best you can. And then when you learn more and practice more, do even more, do better. But start where you are.
Start where you are. And that, for our listeners, is important in every area of your life, whether it's personal, whether it's professional, whether it's financial. Don't compare your point A to someone else's point Z, because you're never going to start. Start where you are. Improve with the smallest steps you can possibly take. And eventually you'll be able to take bigger steps, but just start. And Donna, how can our listeners find you?
I have a website, www.yearoflivingkindly.com. There's a portal to email me on there. I'm on Twitter and Facebook and LinkedIn, and I'm always happy to hear from people about their experiences of kindness or questions about kindness. And what I love is whenever I'm talking with groups, people come up to me afterward and share their own stories of kindness. So I think we're all seeing it and recognizing it. And I hope having listened to this, your listeners will start noticing more opportunities to be kind and noticing more ways that kindness is all around them.
Absolutely, Donna. And on so many of those channels, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, a lot of the people see the divisiveness. And at the same time, there are such great communities that you can find where people are kind, where people do care about each other, where people do try to help lift each other up. And you just have to search it out and slowly divorce yourself from those people who don't want to be kind and share those messages of love and heart-centered living. I want to thank you for being on The Pursuit of Learning. It was a very enjoyable conversation. I really enjoyed your book. We'll have the book, links to buy the book, and we'll have links to your website and to your social media profiles in the show notes for our listeners to find you. Thank you for joining us today, Donna.
Thank you, Clint. It was such a pleasure.
Thank you for joining us on The Pursuit of Learning. Make sure to hit the subscribe button and head over to our website, thepursuitoflearning.com, where you will find our show notes, transcripts, and more. If you like what you see, sign up for our mailing list. Until next time, your host in learning, Clint Murphy.